Everyone, check in on your favorite One Piece TCG content creator because it is going to be a busy week for them. Not only do we have Anime Expo happening this weekend, but also the card list for all of the starter decks has been revealed, including the blue starter deck. Let's talk about it. What's up, captains? Welcome back to The Other Decks. My name's Casual Adobo, and today we're going to be discussing the card list for the blue starter deck. So if you checked out my video that I did on the green starter deck last time, you'll know that they only revealed the full card list and the card effects, but they didn't give us any ratios for what's in the individual starter deck. So I figured that would be an opportunity to not only go over some of the effects, but also give you what my version of the optimized starter deck would look like if we had bought two starter decks, had full playsets available, and then smashed them together. What kind of ratios would we have? So stay tuned for that, because that is going to be after we go through all the cards, so stay tuned for that. Overall, I think that the blue starter deck is in a very interesting space. Much like Digimon, this blue seems to be focused on a little bit of card draw, a little bit of searching, a little bit of return our opponent's characters to their hand. But I am super fascinated by blue and how people are going to build it. So if the blue starter deck is something that you're interested in, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear what sort of ideas you're rolling with in the very, very early stages of the One Piece TCG. By the way, for anyone who doesn't know, this is covering the Japanese meta, and the starter decks are coming out on July 8th. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below if you're excited about blue, and while you're down there, if you would, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. As I mentioned sort of in the cold intro, it's going to be a busy week for One Piece TCG, and when I'm making this, it's probably going to be along a whole sort of lineup of One Piece TCG content, so I'm super excited about that, super excited about the game, and you know, I think there's some really cool effects in the blue starter deck. So that's enough about me rambling. Let's just go ahead and jump right into the card list. Alright, and here we are at the card list. This is actually coming from the One Piece TCG's official website. I just went to the Japanese site and then went into languages, and there's an English Asia section. So that's why you'll notice the cards have Japanese text on it, but when you click into it, English translations, which is pretty nice. But before this came out, I was getting a lot of my information from the One Piece TCG Discord group, which I'll link down below. And then for later in the video, I do a lot of my deck building in the One Piece Card Game.dev website. Same good people who made the Digimon Card.dev website. And honestly, it's super useful, and especially now that a lot of the features that were on Digimon Card.dev are slowly coming into the One Piece Card Game.dev website. It's super smooth, it's super awesome. And there's dawn curves, which is something super important that we need to talk about. But anyway, that's enough of the setup. Let's just go into the effects. So, starting us off with our leader. So this is Crocodile, 5k, 5 life leader card, 7 Warlords of the Sea, and Baroque Works. Then activate main once per turn, Dawn -4. So you're going to have to return 4 Dawn from the field to your Dawn deck. Return 1 character with a cost of 5 or less to the owner's hand. And that range of 5 or less is pretty broad, as that covers almost everything in the red starter deck, and then a lot of things that make up the bulk of most of the starter decks in the starter deck meta. So pretty good ability. Dawn -4, not as steep obviously as the Kaido starter deck, but interesting that has a Dawn minus ability. Moving on, we do have Edward Weevil. This is 3 cost 5k vanilla, but does have counter potential with a plus 1000. And if you heard me talk about the starter decks, I think that the 5k vanillas are super important for this early part of the game, just because that is a natural attacker that can swing into our leader and do some damage without needing to have Dawn attached to it. Moving on, we do have the character Crocodile card. So this is a 5 cost 6k power, naturally has blocker, which is awesome. And then Dawn ×1 on block, so our first instance of an on blocking ability. Place 1 character with a cost of 2 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. Honestly, that's pretty good. That said, 2 cost or less is pretty restrictive. You can take out some pretty instrumental pieces in the starter deck meta, and then putting it at the bottom of the owner's deck is pretty fascinating. Because in most setups, that is essentially as good as KOing it. They'll never see that card again. I would say the only exception is if you're doing a mirror match against a blue starter deck, but I'll talk about that in a bit. Next up, we do have Gecko Moria, so 4 costs 5k, which is already good by itself, has counter potential, which is solid, but also has an on-play ability. So on play, add 1 Sever Warlords or Thriller Bark Pirates type character with a cost of 4 or less from your trash, and then put it into your hand. Other than Gecko Moria, that way you can't just juggle Morias. But it's cool to see that kind of recursion coming into the blue starter deck. Makes sense for anyone who knows who Moria is in the anime and manga. But no, this is pretty awesome. I like this ability a lot. Next up, we do have Mihawk. So this is a 4 cost to play, 5,000 power. So once again, good on its own. Counter plus 2,000, which means in our optimized starter deck, we're probably going to have it at 4 of. And has an awesome ability of Dawn ×1, so attach 1 Dawn to it when attacking, draw 2, trash 2. So draw power, hand cycling power, counter potential. This, I would argue, is the most valuable card to come out of the blue starter deck. Next up, we have fan favorite Jinbei, so 2 costs, 4k, vanilla. Has counter potential. It's good. I think one thing that we'll see as we phase out of the starter deck meta into the set 1 meta of One Piece trading card game is that some of these 1 cost, 2 cost vanillas are going to be phased out. But I think for the starter deck meta, the 4k power character cards do have a slot in the decks, just because you only need to attach 1 Dawn onto it to make it a viable attacker. Next up, we have Sentomaru, who's 3 cost, 4k power, but has a pretty unique thing. Dawn ×1, activate main once per turn, 2. So that's a lot of things. Let me break that down. So you do need to have 1 Dawn attached to the card in order for you to activate the main. And then activating the main, you need to turn or suspend 2 Dawn from your cost area in order to activate it. So immediately, there's a lot of steps, but for good reason. Once per turn, if you do all this jazz, you can play 1 Pacifista with a cost of 4 or less from your deck, then shuffle your deck. So that's sort of why I said that with the blue starter deck, if you're kind of in that mirror matchup, that return to the bottom of the deck effect from Crocodile normally would mean that they'll never see that again, but Sentomaru allows you to shuffle your deck. So any sort of abilities, either from you or your opponent, that return things to the bottom of the deck, this allows you to shuffle up and really make it so that you might have a chance to see those things again. So yeah, Sentomaru is pretty cool. Next up, we have our Law card. This is a 1 cost, 1k blocker, essentially. Then next up, we have Don Quixote. Next up, we do have Doflamingo, who is 7 costs to play, but a 7k attacker, as well as having an on-play ability. So on play, return 1 character with a cost of 7 or less to the owner's hand. Now I think it was Asaraf that pointed out, but a lot of these bounce abilities do not specify opponent. So if for some reason you wanted to return something of yours with 7 costs or less, you could, but most likely you're going to want to do this to remove something threatening on the board. Next up, we do have Bartholomew Kuma. So this is a 2 cost to play, 3k power, but on play, look at the 3 cards from the top of your deck and then return them to the top or bottom in any order. So if you're coming from like Magic or something, this is like scrying. And then as I mentioned with Sentomaru, even if you bottom deck something that could have been useful later on in the match, there's a potential you could still see it, just because Sentomaru allows you to shuffle. And then probably the best thing about this card is the trigger ability, play discard. Next up, we do have Buggy, who has our 1 cost 3k power vanilla card, has counter potential. Unfortunately, that's it. Sorry, Buggy fans. Next up, we have Pacifista. So this is a 4 cost to play, 6,000 power biological weapon / navy type, and has counter potential. And then you've probably seen me talk about it a little bit, but 6,000 power is really good to have on board just because it has such presence. It really puts a lot of pressure onto your opponent to try and deal with it somehow. But the best thing about Pacifista is Sentomaru, because it allows us to cheat it out from the deck. So yeah, if you find Sentomaru early in game, it can add up a lot of pressure onto the board. Next up, we do have Boa Hancock, so 3 costs to play, 1,000 power. It is a blocker, which is good, but also trigger, play this card. So if you happen to get Boa Hancock in life, you can play it onto the board, and it is now a new blocker for you to use. So yeah, lots of blockers in the deck so far. Moving on to Marshall D. Teach, 4 cost to play, 4,000 power, but on playability. Return 1 character with a cost of 3 or less to the owner's hand. Once again, a pretty nice card to see early game, as it allows you to gain some tempo on your opponent. 4,000 power ain't bad, and because it is Sever Warlords, it can be fetched by Moria from trash. So that was the last of our characters. Moving on to the event cards, we have Sables, which is a 4 cost to play event. Main ability, return 1 character with a cost of 7 or less to the owner's hand, and then also has a trigger ability, which says activate this card's main effect. So yeah, Sables is the main event card that I think we'll want to see in the blue starter deck, just because it allows us to return things with a pretty wide range. I think to date, the only thing that wouldn't really be touched by this would be 9 cost Kaido, but then again, it's 9 cost. If you're seeing the character Kaido onto the field as an opponent, it's probably too late, to be honest. But for every other character, this is super good. Next up, we have Thrust Pad Cannon, 2 cost to play, counter event. So counter, return 1 character with a cost of 3 or less to the owner's hand. Then trigger, activate this card's counter effect. So the reason I like this event card a lot is because if your opponent attacks with something like an Eroge, right, that is 2 cost to play for the green starter deck, but has a lot of power potential, you can use this to target that attacking character and then return it to hand, and the attack fizzles because the attacker is no longer on the board. So yeah, Thrust Pad Cannon is super awesome in the starter deck meta and probably moving forward. The only reason I add some hesitation to that is because I think a lot of people are going to be looking at things in the 4 to 5 cost range when they're building their actual decks with the actual set 1 cards. And so we'll have to see how people are building it, and if there are, a lot of decks that are kind of low to the ground, kind of in that 1 to 2 to 3 range, then Thrust Pad Cannon becomes a much more valuable event card. And then the last card in the blue starter deck, the Sever Warlords of the Sea starter deck, is Love Beam, or as they're calling it, Love Mellow. So 2 cost to play, counter event. Your leader or one of your characters gains plus 4,000 power for the turn, or for the battle, I mean. Then draw 1 card if you have 3 or less cards in your hand. So I think, as we've seen in a lot of the starter decks, some of the matches that we've done, draw power is super important. So the fact that this gives you a little bit of draw power, granted is pretty restrictive, but the fact that it does give you some draw power is pretty good. And then obviously a counter plus 4,000 is solid. Only downside is that you have to leave 2 Dawn available to use it, but honestly, not that bad. So now that we've seen all the cards in the card list for the blue starter deck, let's talk about what we would do in terms of ratios to make what I would call an optimized starter deck. Alright, and here we are at the Dawn curve. As you'll see, this definitely plays more like a bell curve, especially early on. There's a lot of kind of consistent ramp going into our 4 costs, and the majority of our cards are going to be in that 4 cost range, which honestly is pretty cool, because if you're going second, you have 4 Dawn available on turn 2. If you're going first, you'll have 4 Dawn at least available by turn 3. So I would say the way I built this is definitely a want to start second type of deck. And then real quick, because I keep forgetting to mention the counters in this section, we are running 38 counters. Now granted, 7 of them are event-based counters, but even without that, that means we're running 31 character-based counters. Now that we've seen the Dawn curve, let's go ahead and check out my ratios. Alright, so I'm going to go through this kind of fast just because we've already gone through all of the effects, but just wanted to talk about some of the justifications as to why I valued one card over the other when it comes to the ratios. So starting us off with our leader, we can only have 1. Going into characters, 4 of the law blockers. So the 1 cost blockers are going to be a staple in the starter deck meta for sure, and I think they're going to hold a spot for themselves in the set 1 meta, just because they're cheap blockers. Moving on to our 2 costs, we do have 4 copies of Jinbei. Like I said when I was talking about the effects earlier, I think these are some of the cards that might be phased out as we go into set 1, but for the starter deck meta, the 4K power character cards still hold a place in there. You just need 1 Dawn attached to make it a viable attacker, but also it does have counter potential. So if you're feeling pretty good about some of the other on-play strategies you have, you can hold the Jinbeis in hand just as counters. But we like to give the options. Moving on to our threes, we do have 4 copies of Boa Hancock. 3 costs for 1k character card is a little expensive, but do remember it is a blocker that has a trigger ability. Play this card, right? And the reason I want 4 copies of Boa in the deck is because there's a greater chance that we'll see the Boa Hancock in life and not in the rest of the deck, as opposed to saying like a 3 or a 2. And having a blocker that can trigger from life is pretty solid. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Sentomaru, and as I mentioned in the effects, I think once you're able to activate Sentomaru's ability, it's just very good to kind of swarm the board with pacifistas. And the fact that it allows you to shuffle your deck, which is the first instance of that we've seen in the One Piece trading card game. But yeah, I think this is a super valuable ability, and that's why I keep it at 4. Rounding out the 3 cost characters, we do have 4 copies of Edward Weevil. 5k attacker naturally, can naturally swing into our opponent's leader. Overall, I think it's very good for the starter deck meta. Moving on to the 4 costs. So we have 3 copies of Marshall D. Teach. It is only 4k, which means you do need to attach a Dawn to it. And then return a character that costs 3 or less to the owner's hand is just okay. I think 3 allows me to see the card enough if I need to return something more problematic, but we do have a lot of bounce effects built into the rest of the cards that we have. So 3 copies of Teach. Moving on, do have 4 copies of Gecko Moria. The ability to return the 7 Warlords from our trash is pretty valuable. And that targets anything with a cost of 4 or less. So that can grab our blockers in Law and Hancock, can grab Mihawk, it can grab our natural attacker in Weevil. So Gecko Moria is very, very solid. Speaking of solid, we do have 4 copies of Mihawk. So this is 5k, so natural attacker, has an awesome 1 attacking ability if you have 1 Dawn attached, allows us to cycle our hand a little bit, and arguably more importantly, has counter plus 2000. So if you do have a really good hand, you could use Mihawk as a counter, put it in the trash, and then play the Moria in order to bring back Mihawk. So yeah, 4 copies of Mihawk is what I would argue as a must-have in any, honestly, blue strategies. Last but not least in our 4 cost category is the Pacifista. 6k power, can be cheated out with Sentomaru, and that's why we have 4 copies of it. And then going into our 5s, we do have 2 copies of Crocodile, so has blocker, and then return up to one of our opponent's cost 2 or lower characters to the bottom of their deck. If you wanted to bump this up to 3, you totally can, maybe removing one of the event cards that I'll discuss in a bit. But the reason I put this here was because it's a 5 cost, which is okay. 6k blocker is really nice. I just didn't think I was getting much utility out of the when blocking ability. You know, I can see it against the green starter deck having a lot of value, bouncing some blockers. And maybe this was just who I was playing testing against, but it just did not go off as much as I'd like it to. So I'd say this is like a 2 to 3 copies range of Crocodile. And then for the last character card, we do have 3 copies of Don Quixote do Flamingo. So really awesome on playability to return pretty much anything on the board. And then a 7k attacker, so very good offensive juggernaut. And then moving on to our events, we have 3 copies of Sables. So return one of our opponent's characters with a cost of 7 or less to the owner's hand. Very good trigger ability. If you want, you can bump this up to 4, but I think 3 is a good number. And it does have some pretty interesting combo potential because you can play this event for 4 and then use the 4 that you tap to use the event, and then sacrifice those with Leader Crocodile's ability to return another character. But yeah, Sables is pretty solid. But as I mentioned in the sort of effects preview, I like Thrust Pad Cannon a lot, especially in the early sets of the starter deck meta. So 2 costs to play, counter, and then you can counter and return something to your opponent's hand. The target does have to be cost 3 or lower. That said, if you wanted to put another Crocodile in, you can probably replace one of these, bring this down to a 3, and then make Crocodile 3. And then last but not least, we do have 3 copies of Level of Beam. 2 cost event counter, sure, but plus 4,000 power for the battle, pretty awesome, and then potential draw power. So yeah, that is the blue starter deck card list, as well as my optimized version of the deck list. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. I think it's pretty interesting because this is the 3rd of the optimized starter decks that I've done so far. And each of them have had kind of different Dawn curves associated with them, just based on the way I want to focus on them. So it's pretty cool to go through these videos and these little experiments to see how things would be built and what the Dawn curves would look like. It'll be interesting to kind of analyze once we get like tournament stuff what their Dawn curves are and see if there is, you know, the golden ratio as we like to talk about in Digimon. But yeah, let me know what you thought about this. Which decks are you excited about for the One Piece trading card game? They released July 8th, so we're going to be getting a lot more information about these starter decks soon. And it's just a very overall exciting time to be a One Piece fan and a fan of trading card games, especially if you're in Japan. And then one day that'll be us in the US with the Super pre-release in September, and then when it finally launches for the US in December. But yeah, I think that'll do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And captains, remember, build what you like, play what you love. And I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good one.